The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A lot of interesting news about this election that is going on. If you haven't heard of it, we do have a presidential election. Donald Trump, if you're waking up today, you might be shocked to hear that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. He is not ahead, though. Hillary Clinton's national lead, to the extent that the national lead matters, given that we have an electoral college system in the United States, continues to strengthen. Hillary Clinton now leading in 19 of the most recent 19 polls. You will see at the top of the screen the Real Clear Politics average, where Clinton's lead has now grown to 7.7 percentage points. And in every poll, starting with a Bloomberg poll completed just a couple of days ago, all the way back to an Economist YouGov poll taken in the fourth week, the end of the third week, beginning of the fourth week of July. The last 19 polls have Hillary Clinton ahead of Donald Trump. Now, in some of these, she's only up by one. Like, for example, in the right-wing leaning Rasmussen reports, in some of these, she is up by 15. Now, let's dig more deeply into this. Every time I mention this, at the beginning of the week, it was 16 of the last 16 polls. Now it's 19 of the last 19 polls. Every time I mention it, people email me. They say, David, these polls mean nothing because you're not including Green Party candidate Jill Stein and Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson. When you include Stein and Johnson, so say many of the people emailing me, Hillary Clinton's lead disappears. Well, we have that data, and the reality is that claim is not true. As you can see here, in 15 of the last 15 polls, Hillary Clinton is still leading when Gary Johnson and Jill Stein are included as options. Her average lead is 7.2 percentage points here, a difference from when it is only a two-way poll of half a percentage point. That is not really a very big difference, as you can see there. When looking at these numbers, I don't question whether Hillary Clinton is being hurt by the existence of these third-party candidates. I will, in the next segment, actually suggest to you that she is being helped by these third-party candidacies. My question is, Gary Johnson is currently averaging 9%. Will Gary Johnson get 9% of the vote in November? I think the answer there is no, Lewis. I don't know how you feel about that when you see these polls and see Gary Johnson polling 9.
9% seems pretty high, but if Donald Trump keeps shooting himself in the foot, those people are not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. They'll most likely vote for Johnson. So I say that this is somewhat realistic, yeah.
Jill Stein averaging 3.7% of the vote. Will Jill Stein get 3.7% of the popular vote on November 8th?
Well, that is a more believable number for me might be something like 2%.
I actually think it's quite realistic to think Jill Stein could end up with 3 to 4%. The PR around her campaign has certainly been stronger than we've seen around third-party candidates, at least at minimum in 2008 and 2012. I do not believe Gary Johnson will end up with 9% of the vote nationally. But at the same time, what does that really matter? We should really be looking state by state, and that is exactly what I want to do next with you. One big question that has been coming up is, what will the impact be on the November 8th election of third-party candidates, most notably Gary Johnson for the Libertarians and Jill Stein for the Green Party? We also have this new independent Republican Mormon candidate who could make an impact in Utah. I talked about that yesterday. So nationally, I already told you, Hillary Clinton ahead in the most recent 19 polls of two-way races and in the most recent 15 polls of four-way races. But are there specific states where, as of today, given that it is not quite yet mid-August, are there specific states where a third-party candidate could be changing the outcome of that state's decision on November 8th as to who they will support for president? The answer is absolutely. I'm going to show you now a list of states where Gary Johnson helps Hillary Clinton. So this is a list of states as of today based on the most recent data from electoral-vote.com, of states where Gary Johnson is polling higher than the lead for Hillary Clinton. So here's an example, right? In Connecticut, Hillary Clinton is currently up 5. Gary Johnson is polling 6%. That is a state where, given that Gary Johnson gets more support from the right than the left, Gary Johnson's presence is clearly helping Hillary Clinton. Florida. Clinton is now +2 in Florida. Gary Johnson is polling 6% in Florida. Florida is hugely important. A lot of electoral votes at stake. A very important state if Donald Trump wants to be president. Gary Johnson is directly responsible right now, in part, for the fact that Hillary Clinton is ahead. Georgia. Very few people would imagine that Georgia is in play. Hillary Clinton currently up 5 in a recent poll in Georgia. Gary Johnson polling 9% there, making a difference. Iowa is a tie, and Gary Johnson is polling 12% there. Nevada, Hillary Clinton is up 1, Johnson polling 2%. And then we have both Ohio and Wisconsin, where Gary Johnson is polling 10%, bigger than Hillary Clinton's lead. If anybody thinks, Lewis, that Gary Johnson cannot have an impact at the state level, that list we just showed our TV and video audience suggests otherwise.
It's true. And we're probably both thinking the same thing, that at the same time, this is fantastic and wonderful and incredible, because there's maybe arguably nothing more important than introducing more parties to our political system. But at the same time, we know what this means for Donald Trump. It's
bad for Donald Trump. And now I don't want to overstate. I don't want to suggest that Hillary Clinton might only win if she wins because of Gary Johnson. All of those states together are a total of 92 electoral votes. Right now, if Donald Trump were to take over a lead in every single one of those states, it would make it so that he is now projected as the winner with over 270 electoral votes. But the reality is, it's not very likely that Gary Johnson will ultimately make a difference in all of these states. But the point is, Lewis, we can point to a number of states where right now Gary Johnson's support is significantly bigger than Hillary Clinton's lead. And you can make a pretty strong case that in those states, Gary Johnson's presence is hurting Trump and helping Hillary, which is exactly what we've said would happen from day one.
And I imagine many staunch Trump supporters are pulling their hair out right now, like we might have been pulling our hair out when Ralph Nader did his thing. And so that's just how it goes. But it's still great that someone who is running as a third party can have such high levels of support.
And I also want to be very clear that just because we can point to individual states where Gary Johnson appears to be having an impact, the big picture of the map is heavily influenced by the reality that Hillary Clinton is quite far ahead right now in 19 of 19 recent polls. Were Hillary Clinton not already ahead, as the polls indicate today, Gary Johnson's impact would be smaller. So I don't want to misstate or be misheard, because how I'm heard is arguably as important as what it is that I am saying. We can point to some individual states where Gary Johnson is definitely helping Hillary Clinton. The odds that Gary Johnson, based on the polling today, or Jill Stein, reverse the eventual results in the National Electoral College on November 8th, pretty slim. Okay, Donald Trump is not stopping the continued, penchant for, obsession with, making completely ridiculous and baseless comments. And the latest, after, I guess, attempting to reset his campaign by suggesting his supporters kill Hillary Clinton, his latest accusation is that President Barack Obama is actually the founder of ISIS. Now, I know, Lewis, you didn't know that. I didn't know that. Many in our audience would be surprised to hear, wait a second, Obama founded ISIS? But that is exactly what Donald Trump said last night at another one of these completely laughable rallies where he shows up looking a very strange shade of orange with bizarre notes and just making statements that don't make sense. Let's take a look at the video.
To say, ISIS is honoring President Obama. He is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS.
Yeah.
Okay? He's the founder. He founded ISIS. And I would say the co-founder would be crooked Hillary Clinton.
Right. That immediately was met with chants of lock her up by the crowd. Did you notice, Lewis, that you can actually see in the picture that's over my shoulder, This is not a lot of people here. And of course, people on stage are pretty carefully selected. Right here, you will notice a black woman. And right here, you will notice a black man. As we know, Trump polling 0% among black people statistically in some states like Ohio. Talk about pandering, huh?
Well, I can tell you he doesn't look happy to be there. You can clearly see his facial expression, and he probably thought, I'll just get paid to do this because no one else will, and I'll sit here and I'll deal with this and listen to Trump.
No actual evidence, though, that the people on stage were being paid. Lewis is being facetious. We don't want to be accused, Lewis, of suggesting those people were paid. They may well have been, but we just have no evidence to support that.
I'm just assuming that he was paid to be there. So what is Trump suggesting? That the foreign policy decisions of Barack Obama created ISIS?
I guess that's the sort of point.
Because I would say that in that case, George Bush is the founder of ISIS.
I was going to get to that, right? Because this is, number one, this is not the first time that Trump has connected Obama to ISIS. A couple of months ago, he tweeted an article from right-wing news website Breitbart, which said the Obama administration was actively supporting al-Qaeda in Iraq, the terrorist group that became the Islamic State. So Donald Trump is implying, as Lewis says, that the foreign policy decisions of President Obama and Hillary Clinton as President Obama's Secretary of State somehow created the conditions, or maybe even more directly led to the creation of ISIS. Of course, reasonable scholars of foreign policy and reality, as opposed to fantasy worlds, understand that the real single decision that created a vacuum in the area that led to the creation of ISIS was George W. Bush's harebrained decision to go into Iraq in 2003 based on the false pretense that, number one, Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and number two, there was some connection between Iraq and the 9/11 attacks. I've said it before, and I will say it again. If you support Donald Trump, you are either ignorant, unstable, or a genuinely bad person. But as I see this day after day after day, I do start to question the broader intelligence or lack thereof of the U.S. as a nation. And this isn't sort of a comment, Lewis, about individual people, but it's sort of about this entire country. Because although individuals voted for Donald Trump, somehow we've gotten to a place in the United States of America in 2016 where someone like Trump can even become the nominee, who still presents essentially no policy positions at these speeches and says things like Obama founded ISIS and what about killing Hillary?
Yeah, you look at his supporters, and I think we all know that most countries, all countries, are full of racist people. That's never going to change.
No.
Just appealing to xenophobic people is pretty easy to do. But let's face it, our education system is not that great compared to other countries at our level of development.
And that's what you could attribute, at least in
I
part, to
attribute a
this.
lot to our education system, and just generally to decades and decades of corporations buying politicians, and I mean, when that happens, your country just crumbles.
To sum up, Donald Trump has worked out how he will defeat ISIS as president, but it's sort of a secret until he's elected, because of national security and stuff. But he's going to somehow do it without sending in any U.S. troops, because he was always against the Iraq War and would never do that, although we know that he actually told Howard Stern in 2002 he was in favor of the Iraq War, but he never mentions that. So I've actually put together a sort of policy guide for what it is that Donald Trump's plan for the Middle East is. And we've had to infer some of this. So number one, Trump has said he's against intervention in the Middle East. He has also said that forcing regime change is bad and overthrowing Gaddafi was bad, although he is on record in 2011 as having said that he's in favor of overthrowing Gaddafi. So a little bit of a conflict there. He's also said the Iraq War was bad and that he never supported it. That's also a lie. He told Howard Stern in 2002 he's in favor of it. And of course, we know that he will kill and torture terrorists as well as their families. But he's against intervention in the Middle East. And lastly, according to Joe Scarborough, based on a conversation he had with someone who was in the room with Trump during a foreign policy briefing, Trump is not quite clear on why we can't just use nuclear weapons to solve all of these problems to begin with. So I can't make heads or tails out of it, Lewis, is where I come away.
Yeah, it's he doesn't have a plan. He's said before he's going to get the best people. So far, he's collected the worst people.
Yeah.
Maybe it's easier to collect good people once you're actually president.
Sure.
And maybe they think Trump just isn't very legitimate now. Pretty scary that he could be quite legitimate as soon as he's commander-in-chief.
None of this stuff appeals to the Republicans who are just more concerned with smaller government and lower taxes, and they don't really like liberal politicians, right? Just because you don't like Obama doesn't mean you think Obama created the Islamic State. And Donald Trump, although you would imagine he's trying to pivot to appeal to more people in the electorate, the idea that maybe Hillary should be killed or her just judges should be killed, the people she would pick, or that Obama founded the Islamic State, it's actually appealing to a narrower and narrower group of American voters. And we're seeing that reflected in the polls. If I'm wrong about any of this, let me know. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Laura Goldberg. Not only is Laura a great David Pakman Show member, she also, if I recall correctly, lived pretty close to my old neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York there, near the waterfront. Very, very nice area. Thanks to Laura supporting independent media by being a member. You can sign up on the brand new David Pakman Show website. The members portal has received a huge upgrade at davidpakman.com/membership. There is one half-price membership remaining if you use the coupon code BETA50. That's BETA50. Check it out. And remember, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, first visit davidpakman.com/Amazon. And then the shopping you do will support the work that we do. I have sort of a oddball documentary recommendation today. Hear me out, okay? And Lewis, I know you're going to have a reaction to this. The documentary is Tony Robbins, I Am Not Your Guru.
I'm leaving. I'm out of here. That's it.
This is a documentary about this life coach, motivational speaker, call him what you want, Tony Robbins. Huge guy. Had a pituitary gland tumor, I believe, when he was a kid. He's huge. He has huge hands and et cetera, and he's sort of known for his physical presence. He also is a very, very good public speaker, one of the most gifted public speakers, maybe of the last couple of decades, certainly English language. The documentary follows him behind the scenes of this seminar he does called Date with Destiny, where 2,500 people show up. I think they pay $5,000 or $7,000 each to go. And as I watched it, there's no doubt that this is a compelling, great speaker who is able to inspire and get reactions from people. He's very good at reading people on the fly. But I couldn't determine whether this entire thing, this business he built, which has given him a net worth reportedly of around $450 million, is this guy a charlatan? I mean, is he a showman or is he actually helping people? And I don't really know the answer, Lewis. And I've shown this documentary to a few people, many of whom are sort of in the mental health world, and they say, you know, he's clearly very good at connecting with people, but what he's doing is certainly not therapy. And in his defense, he doesn't claim that what he's doing is therapy. But is he really helping people long term? I don't know the answer.
The interesting thing about gurus, and I would recommend simultaneously here, a documentary called Kumare.
Right. Although, to be clear, Tony Robbins doesn't claim to be a guru.
That's fine. Yeah. That's fine. So the point is that whether or not he believes that he is helpful to people or that he has some incredible insight or that he is... I don't even know how you'd word it, that he's supposed to help people, even if he doesn't believe any of that, as long as the people that he's speaking to are bettered by it,
yeah,
then he is helping people. And in Kumare, it's a guy who fakes being the spiritual guru, doesn't believe any of the nonsense he says.
He's deliberately doing it as a goof just to see what the reaction will be, essentially.
Right,
yeah.
But he actually ends up helping many people, and it's very interesting. And so it's really the power of one's mind to convince themselves that they're being helped.
But you do have to have some base level of skills, right? I mean,
you do.
The reason Tony Robbins is able to even make people react in this way to him and feel as though he's incredibly insightful and useful to them is partially that he is such a good speaker.
No doubt. He has a particular skill set, and that is necessary, of course.
I will remind you, we are talking about the documentary Tony Robbins, I Am Not Your Guru. It is on Netflix. I didn't find it on Amazon, but you can check this and all of my other recommendations out at davidpakman.com/recommendations. Let's follow up to this story where Donald Trump started to reset and pivot his campaign by suggesting his supporters maybe use their guns to kill Hillary Clinton. As a backstory, if you missed yesterday's show, here's the video clip of Trump making the suggestion at a rally.
Hillary wants to essentially abolish the Second Amendment. By the way, and if she gets to pick, her judges, nothing you can do, folks. Although the Second Amendment people, maybe there is, I don't know. But I'll tell you what, that will be a horrible day.
A couple updates on this. Number one, there was that guy in the red shirt behind Trump during that speech that I pointed out yesterday who seemed shocked or to be loving it. CNN actually interviewed him and he said, oh, I'm voting Trump. So he clearly was not so disgusted with that suggestion that he's not voting Trump. That's number one. Number two, yesterday I said, imagine being in the Secret Service, right? Your non-political organization. You're there to protect the candidates. And one candidate says something that could endanger the other candidate. What do? According to CNN, you have a conversation with the campaign. CNN is reporting that a U.S. Secret Service official has confirmed that the Secret Service spoke to the Trump campaign about those comments, saying there has been more than one conversation. The campaign said that they said to the U.S. Secret Service that Donald Trump did not mean to incite violence. That is the report that we have seen. And in response to CNN's report, Trump tweeted that no meeting took place, that no conversation took place. And then the latest is that Reuters says, well, no formal discussion took place with the Secret Service. So I think here the key word, Lewis, is formally. There has not been anything denied that some conversation took place between the Secret Service and the Trump campaign. It appears that that could be true while simultaneously maintaining that there was no formal conversation with Donald Trump personally. I don't know, but if I were in the Secret Service, I would certainly be talking to Donald Trump about this. I don't know why it's hard to believe that the Secret Service might have heard this and said, oh yeah, we should talk to the campaign about it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what that conversation was. I'm pretty sure that no one is actually threatened by Donald Trump himself. I mean, no one in the Secret Service thinks Donald Trump is going to go on a shooting rampage.
No.
But it was probably just something along the lines of, just don't say things like that.
Right.
Yeah, just stop.
We know that there are constantly death threats against political candidates, against elected officials, etc. And part of what these agencies like the Secret Service have to do is evaluate what is a credible threat and what isn't. They take all threats very seriously. If you have one of the two major party candidates saying something that could encourage more of those death threats, which then need to be looked into and explored, that's not good for anybody. It's just more work for the Secret Service that could potentially be avoided so they can actually focus on doing what it is they're really supposed to do, which is not protect one candidate from the people that might go after them based on the suggestions made by the other candidate. Now, last thought on this. This morning, I saw a Trump rally, or a Trump speech, I guess you would call it, at the Home Builders Association in Florida, something like that. He seemed very, very low energy. I know that's what he would call Jeb Bush during the campaign. I think something happened over the last 24 hours that may have put Trump over some kind of edge. He showed up with absolutely no energy. He held up a couple of charts that he had printed out. It was palpably lacking the vigor that we have seen from Trump over the last several months. He may really be starting to fall apart here.
This is a taxing schedule. I'm sure it's possible that he was just exceptionally tired that day, or this is what Donald Trump is normally like, and every other time he's on some type of powerful stimulant.
Yeah, I don't know which it is, but noticeably different this morning. Some defenders of Trump like to say, hey, liberals should like him more because he's not a crazy religious conservative. He's really just a business guy. It may be true that Trump's personal social views are not extreme, but he is pandering to the most extreme, regressive, retrograde elements of the Republican Party. And he's capping that off this weekend by attending this ridiculous anti-LGBT event called Rediscovering God in America. This is happening in Florida. This totally abortive conference was founded by David Lane of the American Renewal Project. And I've mentioned this before, Lewis, this is that project that wants to try to get right-wing pastors to run for office at all levels, to just fill government with right-wing Christian pastors. That's sort of the goal. And David Lane was interviewed by Bloomberg and said that he intends to quiz Donald Trump about how he plans to fight, quote, homosexual totalitarianism and the gay rights militants, both completely imaginary problems in the U.S. So I'm glad that they're going to start off by focusing on things that just don't exist.
Yeah, well, this is something that Trump needs to do. When you run as a Republican, this is the kind of stuff you're involved in. Whether you believe it or not, you have to pander to these people and you have to try and get their vote. And it is a pretty disturbing platform they have. I mean, it's bad enough that we have so few scientists and engineers and those types of people running for office. And now they want to throw a bunch of pastors at us. Scary.
Lane is a vocal opponent of LGBT equality. He said that gay people praying at a presidential inauguration back in 2012 might cause car bombs in Los Angeles, D.C., and Des Moines, Iowa, as a sign of God's judgment about the pagan onslaught of the LGBT rights movement. Again, all stuff that just doesn't exist, didn't happen. According to the invitation posted by the group Liberty Council Action, some of the speakers at this, some of the luminaries to speak at this event will be Matt Staver of Liberty Council. He's the guy who represented bigoted Kentucky County Clerk Kim Davis. Staver last month denounced memorial gatherings for the victims of the Orlando nightclub attack as homosexual love fests. He has also claimed that gay people are demonic and looking to abuse children. David Barton will be speaking at this conference. He's a right-wing nut who calls himself a historian. He thinks that God is preventing a cure for AIDS because it's a divine penalty for homosexuality. Of course, ignoring that we are very, very close to an AIDS vaccine. And also speaking at this conference will be Maine pastor Ken Graves, who preaches against what he calls militant homo-fascism. And lastly, Bill Federer, a religious right activist and conspiracy theorist who thinks that gay rights are bringing about the Islamic takeover of America. I never get that, Lewis, because the Islamists hate gays. How is it that they're bringing on a gay takeover?
That is a great question. I don't know. This reminds me of when maybe it was Newt Gingrich said that Muslims are going to take over the country and force atheism on people.
Right.
It's they don't think about what they say. They just say things.
When I hear people say, "Hey, Trump is actually pretty good for the LGBT community for a Republican," what I'm hearing is Trump doesn't seem to personally care about gay people one way or the other, and he also doesn't want them murdered. So in that sense, for a Republican, he's not a bad guy, I guess.
Well, it is a huge step up from many Republicans, yes.
I was looking at some news articles about this morning, and on the right-wing websites, I read comments sort of, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, hey, at least it's not illegal to be gay in the U.S. and you don't get killed like you do in Iran. So it's like a very, very low bar for saying, you know, I think things are good enough for gay people. They're not getting killed here, and it's at least not barred legally from existing in public society. It's sort of sad, actually, that the bar is being set that low for some of these right wingers.
Yeah, but while there's some truth to that, we're well past that. And so, I mean, if you want to bring that up in other countries, by all means, it's hugely important. But that is their bar, and it's bad.
After the break, I'm going to speak to attorney Mike Papantonio, the latest on his cases against Dupont for this horribly toxic chemical C8 that is produced. It's a byproduct of the production of that nonstick coating Teflon. And we will talk to Mike Papantonio about how dating all the way back to 1961, Dupont had at least some reason to believe this stuff, C8, was not good for people's health.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by attorney Mike Papantonio, co-host of Ring of Fire. Let's talk, Pap, first about the latest with this C8 Teflon Dupont case. And just sort of to refresh everybody's memory, when some people hear about this case, they say, oh, this is a case about Teflon-coated nonstick pans. Those may have their fair share of concerns, but this is actually about a chemical involved in the production of that Teflon surface.
Yeah, it's amazing to me the people that don't understand what C8 is. You hear about Flint, Michigan, and you hear about lead in the water, and that's bad, that's awful. But here you have C8 in drinking water all over the United States. In about 8 or 10 major urban areas, they're drinking C8, not understanding that the very people who manufacture C8, as early as the 80s and the 90s, it was clear to them that C8 causes cancer. And as a matter of fact, they even told their employees who were working around C8 that it'll cause cancer, but they didn't tell the people who were drinking it. What happens is it's two ways it enters the water: by way of air deposits, and also by the way of them simply dumping the C8 into waterways. The Ohio River is a great example. They dumped 1,700,000 pounds into the Ohio River over a period of time. It ended up in people's drinking water in 6 major drinking facilities up and down the Ohio River that supplied water for about 80,000 people who were drinking the stuff every day. Their children were drinking it, putting baby formula. But it doesn't seem to matter. I mean, it's a remarkable thing. It doesn't seem to matter to DuPont. And now, finally, the United States, the DOJ, never had any courage to prosecute. They still won't. I mean, nothing's really changed under, under our latest DOJ. So in Europe, they are. In Europe, they're asking real tough questions. In Amsterdam, for example, you have the company being called in for hearings, and they're just really almost just a step away from serious prosecution, I predict.
So talk to us so far financially, what has been awarded and how many individual potential plaintiffs are you now up to?
Well, I mean, so far we've only had 2 trials of 2 individuals, and the last one was tried. The jury came back with $5.6 million for a man who had testicular cancer about 20 years ago. And the case was so strong, it really didn't bother them that the cancer had resolved, because, you know, there's a notion in this business, and that is that documents drive damages. In other words, once a jury sees that a real ugly, culpable company has done some horrible things, they're not really focused on damages as much as they are just some type of retribution, and that's what happened here. The first case was the same. Jury came back, a woman had 17 years ago, had a kidney cancer. Part of her kidney was removed, and they came back with about $1.6 million. So, and there's 4,000 of these cases. We're going to keep trying them. The interesting thing about these particular cases, we can try them for a very long time, because every time we win, we are actually awarded attorney's fees. The client, in other words, the client is awarded that, and so it makes it fairly easy to be able to try the cases for a whole host of different lawyers that can come in there, and with the facts that we have, they're going to win most times.
What this case reminds me of in some ways is what we've now learned about Exxon and how early they knew that their activities with fossil fuels were damaging to the environment. Your work on this case has turned up that as early as February of 1961, DuPont became aware that at least in rats, C8 exposure was linked to enlargement of the testes, kidneys, adrenal glands, etc. And there's this chain of very incriminating documents going all the way back to 61 here. The idea that DuPont just had no clue has really fallen by the wayside here. I mean, it's just not believable.
Yeah, and to me, that's why I keep coming back. To me, it's remarkable that Loretta Lynch or Eric Holder have done nothing about this case. I mean, they're all into what happened in Flint, and Flint was an awful thing. But here, C8 is so ubiquitous now that they're finding it in polar bear livers because it stays in the environment for 5 million years. It stays in the human body for 25 years. And so it's what we call biopersistent. It's not, each and every exposure you have to the product builds up in the body, and it runs a higher risk of causing neurological damage, birth defects, cancer. And the Department of Justice has done nothing at all to look into this thing like they're doing over in Europe, because DuPont has such strong politics in this country. And they're able to back, they backed Eric Holder down. And so I'm sure the same thing's happening with Loretta Lynch. I don't know how we ever hold them responsible, David. The problem is, you dress them up in an Armani suit, put a gold watch on them, have them driving around in a Bentley, and all of a sudden they don't look like thugs. They don't look like criminals, but they are criminals. They're criminals who are capable of killing. Criminals who are capable of doing far more damage than anybody that typically ends up in prison.
You and I have talked about how on so many issues there are really important differences between Democrats and Republicans. But when we talk about the power that some of these corporations have to really avoid any significant scrutiny from both Republican and Democratic administrations, I mean, is this one of those areas where Republicans and Democrats alike are both part of the same problem?
Democrats have been as much help to DuPont as Republicans. I tried a case one time to show you how full the Democrats are behind it. We had a case, a horrible environmental case in West Virginia. The jury ultimately came back with $380 million against DuPont. But the Democratic establishment and Joe Manchin himself, the governor at the time, was doing everything they could to cause harm to the claimants, his own constituents, and to prop up DuPont at every turn. That is the new DuPont. That is the new centrist Democrat that unfortunately we see now running with Kane and Hillary. Not much is different. I mean, so these people that we see Democrats do better on social issues, David. They do well on things like gender issues and rights issues, but where it comes to things like Wall Street, where money affects politics hugely, the Democrats are absolutely no different than Republicans. And as a matter of fact, I have a book coming out in September that I talk about this very issue. It's a book called, it'll be released in September 20th, Law and Disorder. And I spend some time talking about the fact that we're kidding ourselves if we think there's much of a difference here.
Last thing I want to touch on, when you hear the reaction from DuPont to everything that's going on with C8, you will sometimes hear this talking point that, hey, we've phased out C8. We're now using, and it's amazing because the name is almost the same, we're now using C6 instead. Yeah. C6 is already showing the same types of patterns in research that C8 was, isn't it?
Actually, they're showing worse patterns, David, because it has the biological uptake is quicker with a C6. And again, it's the EPA asleep at the wheel, not really asleep at the wheel. They know exactly what they're letting DuPont do. But again, money talks with both Democrats and Republicans, and that's why DuPont has been able to kill so many people over the years with their product. And so you have people that died of cancer for decades, and they never saw the connection. They never understood that they were drinking this cancer-causing substance in the water, showering with it, swimming in it, eating fish out of the river where the pollutant is. And so family members die, and they have no idea that there's a connection here.
Before we let you go, tell us a little more about the book, which, as you mentioned, is coming out September 20th. It's currently available for pre-order on Amazon. What can you tell the audience about? There's sort of like a fictionalized David Pakman in the story, isn't there?
There is. You'll like your character in the story, David. It's the point I make about you and other people in social media. I use your name. Sometimes I dress the names up, but I use you to make the point that without people in social media, that do exactly what you do every day. These stories would never be told. Corporate media cannot tell the same story that David Pakman tells, because David Pakman, for example, is not reliant on advertisers to keep him alive, the big advertisers like Ford and Merck and Pfizer. So, so your role, the role you play in this process, is so critical to getting these stories out there, and that's one thing I do with. I hope you like. I hope you read it and you like the character.
I will absolutely read it, and we will have more information in the video description about how to pre-order the book, and we'll have Mike Papantonio back on to talk more extensively about it. We've been speaking with attorney Mike Papantonio, co-host of Ring of Fire. Great always to talk to you.
Thank you, David. I enjoy coming on your program.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There's an anti-pornography group called Enough is Enough, and they released a press statement where they said that Donald Trump has pledged to effectively ban porn if elected president. Trump signed a pledge distributed to all of the presidential candidates by this group, Enough is Enough, called, quote, the Children's Internet Safety Presidential Pledge. And it frames porn sort of as something inherently tied to the exploitation and endangerment of children. And the pledge itself makes it sound sort of like all porn, not just child porn, that all porn is dangerous to the well-being of children. And Enough is Enough says that obscene porn and child porn are not protected under the First Amendment. Now, we already have laws in place that prevent and punish the sexual exploitation of children. But this pledge that Donald Trump has signed, according to this release by Enough is Enough, suggests that all obscene porn, that's not a term that's explicitly defined, so what is even meant by obscene porn, should receive the same legal treatment as child pornography. So for example, if, let's say Lewis was into something where like Magic the Gathering is played in the context of pornography, if somebody said, oh, that's obscene, it would effectively be treated just like child porn, which seems a little crazy to me, Lewis, for the party that says, oh, actually, we want small government.
Yeah, I'll be damned if I'm arrested for that. I mean, that's bad.
In the press release that they released, Enough is Enough mentioned that Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton has not signed this pledge. Actually, Hillary Clinton basically doesn't sign pledges, as far as I understand. The idea of banning porn is pretty absurd in and of itself. If no laws are being violated, how do you justify banning porn? And of course, what counts? When you say, well, anything obscene will be banned, is NC-17 movie content obscene? What about simulated sexual acts? Or what about whatever? We can come up with whatever example we sort of want here. But there's actually a bigger issue. I mean, we have made it pretty clear that the idea of just banning porn is incredibly subjective, because what even really qualifies? But it actually exposes some pretty significant hypocrisy from Donald Trump, because Trump was, number one, interviewed in Playboy magazine years ago, which suggests that he's at least generally okay with that type of nudity in magazines. Is that porn? Well, I don't know. Depends how you define it, I guess. Trump's own wife, Melania Trump, has appeared nude in magazines and has posted intimately with other women. It's possible that Trump's own wife was in content that the group Enough is Enough would want made illegal if the ban that Trump pledged to try to force actually happened if Trump were to be president of the United States. Genuinely and patently ridiculous, Lewis.
Yeah, it's this is. I wonder what other missions they have. Maybe this is the only mission, but I just don't understand this battle. This is like what we talked about in Utah. There's this huge campaign. They say that this is destroying the fabric of America
Right.
and things like that. I mean, honestly, I would say that rhetoric like theirs and Donald Trump's rhetoric is what's destroying the fabric of America.
Well, you know what's also the common thread through all of this? That everything is for the kids. It's to protect the kids, is what we hear from the moral crusaders. We can't have gay marriage because it's dangerous to children. We can't have a trans bathroom policy that lets people use the bathroom for the gender they identify with because it would be dangerous to children. And every single one of these arguments ignores that we already have very extensive laws that protect children from any kind of assault in a bathroom, regardless of what gender the bathroom is designated from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To always protect the kids. And it's sort of smart because people do react to that. It just makes absolutely no sense. Hey, there have been some headlines about Tesla and about a Tesla car that drove its owner to the hospital after he suffered a pulmonary embolism. Now, we agreed that I would make this disclosure. I am a shareholder of Tesla stock. I do want to get that on the record so I have clarity this evening. The headlines are not true, okay? The headline just said, oh, the car drove the guy to the hospital. What happened is that the driver was driving around in his Tesla, and it was on autopilot. And then he started suffering from a pulmonary embolism. And the Tesla remained in autopilot while he looked for the nearest hospital. And then he manually got himself to the hospital. So it basically, instead of calling an ambulance, he said, we're going to use the self-driving, the autopilot mode of Tesla to find a hospital. And then after going about 12 miles down the road, he pulled into the hospital himself, manually steering. So the headlines were wrong, Lewis, but it's still a very interesting story nonetheless.
Yeah, it's, I mean, there are a lot of variables here. Like, what if he was moving at the time he was driving farther away from a hospital?
Right.
But the idea that you can use the map feature and the car in some type of emergency or whatever situation and have the car automatically pilot itself, I mean, I guess that's kind of cool, right? It just seems like it's a nice feature, but of course the media outlets and websites are going to take a headline like that and run with it.
Now, eventually, the cars would be able to actually take people to the nearest hospital. We know that currently you can't have a fully autonomous vehicle. You need to have an able and licensed and aware and awake and not drunk driver ready to take control of the vehicle at any time. So these are really autopilot systems, not fully autonomous. This is happening, right? I mean, that will be possible at some point. The anti-autonomous vehicle stuff continues online. Some people say, oh, drug smugglers will be using autonomous cars to smuggle drugs or people. Drug smugglers are already using human-driven vehicles for those same purposes. Oh, well, autonomous vehicles could be followed, robbed, or hijacked. Human-driven cars can also be followed, robbed, or hijacked. For me, the real issues are sort of the legal infrastructure, and we've talked, Lewis, about some of the logic of the programming of these cars. How should the cars be programmed to make certain decisions about accident avoidance, driving off the road to maybe kill one pedestrian instead of 10 in a crosswalk, etc.? Those are the bigger questions.
And questions for which there is no right answer necessarily. And
right.
So that's complex stuff, and legally even more complex. And there's also the issue of hacking into these types of cars. But I mean, that's just a crime like any other. I mean, it will be illegal and crimes happen.
I don't actually think that the entire programming logic is that complex. When people say, well, if the car could avoid hitting people in the middle of the street by swerving off the road and killing one person who's on the sidewalk, I think as a fundamental basis, because otherwise things get completely out of control, the car should never deliberately break rules of the road like driving on the sidewalk, right? So the car should do whatever it can, and this is like a common people crossing in the middle of the road situation. The car should make every effort to stop as quickly as possible, but driving onto the sidewalk should not be one of the ways in which the car should do that. And we have to remember that if people are crossing, not in a crosswalk, just in front of a car, that they are actually doing something which breaks the law. And I think once we come at it from that perspective, it'll simplify a lot of these hypotheticals.
Well, maybe. But I mean, it all depends on how many variables you're introducing to the problem and to the programming. I think it's probably more complicated than you're suggesting here, but I mean, we'll just have to wait and see what they come up with. There's going to be some really rough patches for sure.
Yeah, we will continue following it, no doubt about it. Hey, I have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call anytime. Here's a voicemail I received.
You know, for the right-wing pundits to compare Donald Trump's joke to Joe Biden's back in 2008 is sad, and it's very disingenuous. Donald Trump's comment yesterday could possibly get somebody to try to kill the Secretary of State.
Right.
A Democratic nomination for president. Yes, somebody could try to kill her over those comments. The way he made them, with that desperation in his voice, that was calling out to crazy people. I can't do it. Please help me. That's all that message said yesterday. That was very dangerous, very scary, and I cannot believe the reaction that we're getting from it. It's wow. This man should be brought up on charges.
So
that
at a
way,
loss for words,
the world will know we take our politics seriously.
Yeah.
It's not just a.
So, a lot of people with that reaction, Lewis, just that this is absolutely unconscionable. Stochastically speaking, Trump may be inciting someone to actually go and try to kill Hillary Clinton. That was the consensus from many in our audience, not the Trump supporters, although even some of the Trump supporters emailed me saying this is sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. On the bonus show today, we will talk about a fatal shooting that happened during an acted scenario at a Citizens Police Academy. Completely unbelievable. We will also talk about Olympic ghost towns and what happens after the Olympics leave town. And lastly, some Snapchat filters draw criticism. We will discuss those and more on today's bonus show. Of course, sign up on the brand new David Pakman Show website. We have one half-price membership left with coupon code BETA50, BETA50, and you will get instant access to the bonus show when you sign up.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.